Do you know where the Nazis disappeared? Since 1945, World War II has piqued the interest of historians and the general public alike, but it's less frequently mentioned what happened to the people who committed one of history's most heinous atrocities. What really happened to the Nazis after World War II? The answer to this question will be discussed in this video. Following the Allied victory in World War II, Germany was divided into occupation zones by the United States, United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. The Allies pursued several different strategies as part of the larger denazification campaign. Denazification was a tactic employed to get the Nazis out of German and Austrian society and to liberate them from their influence. Depending on the zone they lived in, Nazis in detention had varying levels of quality of life. In the Soviet detention facilities, the worst conditions were observed. As a result, a lot of people made an effort to enter one of the Western zones under the guise of holding anti-communist views. In Germany, the Nazi Party had 8 million members, or 10% of the total population. Numerous groups with ties to the Nazi Party had sizable memberships, including the League of German Women, the German Labor Front, and the National Socialist People's Welfare Organization, which had 25 million, 17 million, and 6 million members, respectively. Up to 45 million Germans were a part of the Nazi state's administration through the party and these organizations. Along with these groups, businessmen who exploited slave labor or produced weaponry, as well as powerful landowners, particularly the Junkers in Prussia, also provided major support for Nazism. After Germany submitted, denazification was a massive task that was plagued with numerous challenges. The Western zones were all accommodating, but French-occupied Germany was the most so. Since they believed that all of Germany was to blame for the war, they gave less weight to the distinction between Nazis and non-Nazis. This type of bureaucratic inefficiency is what we're referring to when we say it would be like having an entire country wait in line at the DMV. It was also important to rebuild the German economy. According to the rules for denazification, offenders were to be demoted and forced to do manual labor. But if every Nazi and Nazi sympathizer were made to answer for their crimes, there simply wouldn't be enough qualified workers for a functioning society. For instance, in the British zone, it was discovered that 90% of the lawyers were Nazis. Britain concluded that nominal Nazis might operate in 50% of the German legal civil services, since they couldn't possibly have a functioning society without any law or order, despite the fact that they're not Nazis. It was not an easy task to rebuild a nation while also trying to identify and punish a huge number of guilty individuals. Eisenhower, a general in the army at the time, predicted that the process of denazification would take 50 years when it started. But by 1946, Germany had taken control of denazification after the Allied powers relinquished control. Say what? Indeed, Germany was now in charge of carrying out its own punishment. At the time, there were many sympathetic dictators in South America who opened their figurative doors to the worst of the worst Nazis, making it a popular destination. There are estimates that up to 9,000 Nazi leaders and accomplices fled to South America after the war. By the beginning of 1947, the Allies had detained 90,000 Nazis, while forbidding 1.9 million others from working in any occupation other than physical labor. Over 400,000 Germans were interned in camps by the Allied forces between 1945 and 1950 under the pretense of denazification. Although Brazil and Chile also had a substantial number of exiles, Argentina had by far the greatest number. Juan Perón, the president of Argentina, was a staunch fascist, especially after serving as a military attaché in Italy at the start of World War II. He also wanted to strengthen the military strength of his own country, so he hired personnel with specialized military and technical skills. Through ports in Spain and Italy, Perón and his government officials attempted to create rat lines for Nazi immigration. He also assisted with the forged documents needed to depart the country. The majority of Nazis traveled across the Pacific on counterfeit Red Cross passports that bore Argentina-issued travel documents. Once in Argentina, the majority of Nazis briefly altered their names in an effort to blend in. Some, nevertheless, began using their real names once it became clear that Argentina would not deport them to Germany, even if their identities were discovered. Of course, Argentina was not the only country to use Nazis for its own ends. Recruiting highly qualified scientists and engineers took precedence over punishing crimes against humanity for the respective governments as the Soviet Union and the United States got involved in an armaments race. In order to send German engineers and scientists to the mainland, many of them were Nazis as human weapons. The United States had surreptitiously carried out the Operation Paperclip operation in 1945. German physicist Werner Ausenberg prepared a list of names after Germany realized the necessity for these skills close to the end of the war. A Polish lab technician found the list, which eventually made its way from MI6 to US intelligence, torn up in a bathroom. The main objective of Operation Paperclip was to prevent the Soviet Union from both getting the technical expertise of these men and desiring them for their own side. Under the pretense of an evacuation operation, identified targets were essentially kidnapped and transferred to the United States without their will. There, they were imprisoned for lengthy periods of time for questioning. In the first and most well-known trial, 24 persons were charged. The verdicts ranged from an acquittal to 10 years in jail to death. 12 were given the death penalty. Although some people felt that the trials had served justice, the 12 men who received the death penalty are insignificant when compared to the millions of Holocaust victims and the many of the offenders who were never brought to justice. Some have questioned the legitimacy of the Nuremberg trials, labeling them as judiciously defective and a case of victor's justice. Others have argued that it's hypocritical for Allied countries to prosecute crimes against humanity after engaging in a variety of wartime activities themselves. Germany was given the duty of denazification, even though they were still under Allied occupation after the United Powers abandoned their efforts after only a few months. It should come as no surprise that Germany adopted laxer guidelines for identifying and punishing Nazis. Anyone born after 1919 was excused from punishment since they had been brainwashed. 75% of the public officials who were removed from office by the US had their positions restored. Additionally, 90% of Nazis were deemed to be lesser criminals in order to avoid being bogged down by the drawn-out and annoying process of trials. By 1948, the Cold War had grown in importance to the United States, and any pending cases were expedited through at best dubious judicial procedures. Denazification had come to an end by 1951, and the focus was now on making amends with the victims and their families' families. Almost 80,000 persons were spared punishment or penalties as a result of pardons and amnesties that the German government enacted. Was Germany denazified at this point? Of that time, 77% of the senior staff members at the German Ministry of Justice had previously served in the Nazi Party. Some of the most infamous Nazis managed to flee Germany after the war by first going into hiding. Others well-known figures were apprehended by Nazi hunters, who suddenly appeared to bring war criminals who were living in anonymity to justice. While some lived entire lives getting away with mass murder, other great names were seized. Hitler's final solution and network of concentration camps' architect, Adolf Eichmann, fled to Buenos Aires, where he resided with his wife and 4 children while working at a Mercedes-Benz manufacturing facility. Israeli operatives didn't apprehend Eichmann until 1960, after they drugged him and flew him out of Argentina while pretending to be an Israeli airline employee who had suffered a head injury. Eichmann was later prosecuted and killed in Israel, despite calls for his return from Argentina. However, not all Nazi hunters were government agents. Franz Stengel was located in Sao Paulo by Nazi hunter and Holocaust survivor Simon Wiesenthal. Stengel was in charge of the Action T4 euthanasia program, which executed people who had both physical and mental problems. Stengel was discovered by Wiesenthal and brought to West Germany, where he was given a life sentence. Yaakov Paliv was expelled from the country at the age of 95 in the United States as recently as 2019. Paliv had worked as a guard at a forced labor camp during the war, not on his father's farm as he had stated in 1949. According to a historian at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, that not all Nazis were prosecuted for their crimes is a sad fact. Due to the fact that so few people who were alive during World War II are still living now, Nazi hunting has since decreased. And that's all for today's video. What's your opinion about this? Do let us know in the comments. Also, please do like, share, and subscribe.